Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's good to see you again. You, and you. Yes, all of you. It's wonderful. It's me, your host, Waylene, here with another edition of Kopi Chats. And unlike most days, today I actually have Kopi in a teacup, but still Kopi. And today I have great stuff for you. So I'll jump right into it. Yes. Looky here. Sanctions everywhere. The European Union has barred 7 Russian banks from SWIFT, but spares those in energy. Now, have you noticed that you hear about all these sanctions, on Russian banks using the SWIFT system for funds transfer, and then did you know that banks involved in the energy business, oil and gas in particular, are exempted? Check it out. Here you go, Russia's second largest bank, VTB, and so on and so on and so on. All of them will be given 10 days to wind down their SWIFT operations. Let me see. Where do we say? Yes. Sberbank. That sounds suspiciously like something fertility related. Sberbank, Russia's largest lender, and Gazprom Bank were not included because they are the main channels for payments for Russian oil and gas, which EU countries are still buying despite the conflict in Ukraine. So I think I said this a few times in earlier episodes, and it is obviously something of great import because the Russian economy, relies extremely heavily on oil and gas. So while there's a lot of international pressure being brought to bear on Russia, clearly the biggest lever that anybody can pull for this is not being applied. And why do you think that might be the case? Well, obviously, I would say it's trivially obvious that higher oil prices will just be very, very bad all around. If oil prices go up, and of course, if you block these 2 banks from doing their business in oil and gas, they can't pay or they can't receive payment, and so they can't sell their oil or they can't trade their oil. And what happens is that there will be less supply of oil, leading to increased prices. Of course, that supply of oil, Russian oil, will eventually make it to different buyers through different channels, but that delay alone will increase prices. And what happens? Well, gas prices will increase in the United States, in London, in Paris. And what happens when gas prices increase? People get angry. And so they get angry with who they get angry with. Well, obviously their own leaders. They might also be angry at Vladimir Putin, but you cannot escape, if you are the president of the United States, you can't escape from the consequences of high gas prices. So I think that really that's something that's been really missing in the reporting. It seems that reporting has now gone towards some form of virtue signaling. We want to show that we are taking action and we will punish Vladimir Putin. But of course, we're not going to do it where it really hurts, us in particular. So we're just going to do it in these areas where we can say we did something, but maybe not really, punish them. So this is very unfortunate, but that is the way of the world. Moving on. Check this out. Now, this might be really interesting for anyone who is following this Ukraine conflict. It's reported in the New York Times that China asked Russia to delay Ukraine war until after Olympics, US officials say. And you might look at this and think, well, that's not surprising, right? Yeah, it's probably true. Yeah, it's very believable, right? Because it was, in fact, delayed till after the Olympics. And it's reported by US officials. Probably believable. But I know you better than that. You're not here to believe what the papers say. So let's take a look at it. It starts off, a Western intelligence reports indicates that Chinese officials had some level of knowledge about President Putin's war plans or intentions. Now, this should already raise a red flag. Had some level of knowledge. That's very, very non-specific. Here, reporting by Edward Wong and Julian Barnes. Let's see what Mr. Wong and Mr. Barnes have for us. A Western intelligence report said senior blah 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 some kind of claim. A Western intelligence report. What does that mean? Is it the CIA? Is it the MI6? I don't know what the French intelligence service is called, but is it them? Totally unknown, non-specific. The report indicates this Western intelligence report indicates that senior Chinese officials had some level of knowledge, blah 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 blah, and then it goes on for quite a bit longer. Yeah. So despite not telling us what Western intelligence report, the article can tell us, Barnes and Wong can tell us that different intelligence services had varying interpretations. What does that mean? When asked by email on Wednesday whether Chinese officials had urged Russian officials to delay an invasion, the Chinese embassy spokesman in Washington said these claims are speculation without any basis and are intended to blame, shift, and smear China. Maybe that is the most insightful thing yet to appear here, right? The spokesman, Mr. Liu, he didn't have anything to clarify about it. Of course he wouldn't. Even if he knew something, he would not offer any insight into this. But if it were indeed the case that he didn't know anything about it, this is exactly what he should say. So just speculation without any basis and are intended to blame, shift, and smear China. And does it not look like that? See, this report appears with no sources named, not even to the level of individuals, but just which agency claims that this is the case. I don't even know which country. It's just a Western intelligence report. Which country is that? The West is kind of broad. So this is not credible at all, dear viewer. And of course, I know that you all already know this. There's just, and perhaps that is the purpose is exactly what Mr. Liu from the embassy was saying, to associate China and Russia, because I can't see any other purpose to it. It's such a milquetoast, bland claim like, oh, China asked Russia to delay Ukraine war until after Olympics. Well, if you're anti-war, if you're against the war, you might think like that this was very, unsavory from China to say, hey, could you just, delay the war until after the Olympics, my big party. You might come away thinking that, oh, that's not very nice, China is so cynical. But aside from that, it really makes no difference. It doesn't do anything change anything about the war. It's just to associate in your mind China with Russia being buddies and China doing this unpleasant thing, it's totally not cool. To say, hey, could you do your violence after my party? So that's really all it is, it appears. But I've seen this in several different news sites. So that's really, it feels more like some kind of a disinformation campaign, right? And coming on the heels of my previous couple of videos where I talked a lot about fake news, different examples of fake news, this feels like this might be something like that, extremely non-specific in terms of sources, yet oddly detailed with some very some things that require a lot of interpretation, like different intelligence services had varying interpretations, so that's oddly detailed while being totally devoid of any actual information like about sources. So it feels like an accusation, an effort has been made to link these two countries while avoiding, as much as possible any ownership of these words. Because maybe it's not true, right? Can you imagine if it was true and an organization like the CIA stepped forward and said that we believe this to be true? If it's true, doesn't it feel like they would just step forward and say, we believe this to be true, we have our sources, and if it's not true, feel free to debunk it. Yeah, we'll eagerly await any word from Vladimir Putin or Chinese officials, and of course they will keep quiet about it because they can't debunk it. It's true, right? So perhaps that is what would happen if it were actually true. Now, if any hint of acknowledgement or claim of ownership of this bombshell claim, is totally like kept at arm's length, pushed as far away as possible. Yeah, maybe this means that it actually isn't true, right? All right. So moving on from that, in this time, it appears that there's, in the heat of war, President Zelensky of Ukraine really is doing his best to rally his troops, to inspire his people, and he's using a lot of carefully constructed language to do that. Look at that. Russia wants to erase Ukraine. Nazism is born in silence, he said after a strike on a Holocaust site. The attack damaged the capital's main television mast, built at the site of World War II's biggest slaughter of Kiev Jews and a place of memorial and pilgrimage. See, Ukraine President Zelensky accused Russia of seeking to erase Ukrainians, their country, and their history because a war memorial was struck. There is a TV tower, and apparently there's this must be the memorial grounds. So, why do I show this to you? Well, first of all, it's just to briefly point out that President Zelensky is somebody who seems very savvy with communications, persuasiveness. However, he's not above telling a big one to convince you. So check this out. This is a account called Jewish News, based in the UK. It's been verified, so we can believe that whatever else you might say about it, it is a legit organization. So that was the TV tower that was struck by a missile, and there it is. You can see the memorial right next to the TV tower. The tower was struck. Trees were flattened in the park.
Яка знає нашу історію, світову історію. Бабин Яр – це особлива частина Києва, особлива частина Європи. Місце молитви, місце пам'яті про 100 тисяч людей, яких вбили нацисти. Місце старих київських кладовищ. Ким треба бути, щоб зробити таке місце мішенню для ракет? Ви вбиваєте вдруге жертв Голокосту.
So 5 people were killed in that attack. But you saw the memorial in the video. The memorial still stands. Whereas the early report seems to suggest that there was a strike on the memorial site itself, which doesn't seem to be the case. It seems pretty obvious that the TV tower was struck, right? And that was the target for communications. But President Zelensky made it sound like the target was the Holocaust site. And that's just misleading. And not to pick on President Zelensky alone, of course it happens every which way. But here's a clear-cut example that I wanted to tell you, just to show that you can't trust pretty much anything that comes out of wartime media. It's going to be 99% propaganda, and you can't tell which 1% is the real thing, right? I think that's entirely reasonable to assume. Now, moving on. So, related to that, all this disinformation and cyber warfare, Singapore has decided, it's time to set up a digital military force. Defense Minister said a new unit will be established by the last quarter of the year to integrate Singapore's capabilities in the digital domain. Here he is. Singapore will set up a new wing of its armed forces dedicated to digital security, with the minister saying that this current war has shown the need to build the city-state's own defenses. He said that this will be a fourth service, I guess, after the Army, Navy, and Air Force. So this will be the fourth service. And to put it at that level signifies the importance, attached to developing capabilities in this domain. So I think this is a great move, and Singapore is really leading the way on this in Southeast Asia. I don't think that any other Southeastern country has this has such an initiative yet. I'm sure it will all happen in due time, although not at this point. And Singapore in particular must be extra vulnerable, right? Because I think Singapore is more digital than most of her neighbors. So this is certainly an important thing, and very, very timely. Very, very timely. And to go into this issue just a little bit more, Singapore has really put a lot of focus onto it. In the past few episodes, I've been talking about, how there have been cases of spying. Like here we go, Mr. Hector Alejandro Cabrera Fuentes. He used to work for the the Heart Center in Singapore. In this institution that was collaboration between Duke University in the US and the National University of Singapore, spied for Russia, and that's not the only one. There was a professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, also at the National University of Singapore. He's been banned, deported, had his PR permanent residency cancelled for being an agent of influence for a foreign country, China. Professor Huang is a citizen of the United States, but he is most well known for his extensive knowledge of foreign policy, his China views. Chair of director of the Center of Asia and Globalization, and Lee Foundation professor on U.S.-China relations, known for his views on China. There you go. So, and he's been deported for trying to influence Singapore officials by sharing them privileged information, which you might, in a different context, call disinformation. So Singapore is definitely right in the midst of this information war. And that's not even the only one. There was Mr. Yo, Dixon Yo, who spied for China on the United States. So it turns out that he at first spied for China on Singapore before eventually shifting to spy on the United States. Yo admitted to being fully aware his foreign handlers are working for the intelligence apparatus of China. He was tasked with sourcing information, providing reports on issues of interest to his foreign handlers in China. He had tried but failed to secure employment in the Singapore government sector to further his information gathering activities for China. During a trip to Beijing in 2015, Yo was recruited by Chinese agents who claimed to represent think tanks. He was studying for a doctorate at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at the National University of Singapore at the time. So you can see that Chinese intelligence has penetrated the highest levels of, let's say, academia, at least, right? Because he's a PhD candidate. Dr. Huang was a full professor. And then, Mr. Hector, he wasn't doing it on behalf of China, he was doing it for Russia. But he was of that social status, and he was also involved in these intelligence matters. And Singapore is not the only one facing matters of national security, intelligence, facing this kind of threat. Now, we may have heard, all of us will by now would have heard about issues regarding the use of Huawei equipment, right? It's always like being bullied by the government of the United States. Now, Australia here also turns out also has their own problems with Huawei. In December of last year, it was reported that, let me see, at the core of this case was a software update from Huawei that was installed on the network of a major Australian telco. The update appeared legitimate, but it contained code that worked much like a digital wiretap, reprogramming the infected equipment to record all the communications passing through it before sending the data to China. After a few days, the code deleted itself. The the result of a clever self-destruct mechanism embedded in the update. Ultimately, Australia's intelligence agencies determined that China's spy services were behind the breach. So there you go. That's the accusation. Certainly, there's a official cybersecurity officer from Huawei, in this same article, who claimed that there's no such thing. We are very careful with our security measures, and we welcome investigation in the matter because we also care about that. But I'm not sure that the Australian officials took them up on that offer. So Australia has also got huge problems with this. They've not only had problems with Huawei equipment. Australia's investigated a alleged Chinese plot to install a member of parliament who would spy for China. The allegations, first aired by local network 9 News, assert that a suspected Chinese espionage ring approached a Chinese-Australian man to run as a member of parliament. The 32-year-old man has since died in unexplained circumstances. Of course, China has denied the allegations, while Australia's domestic spy agency has confirmed it's investigating. What happened? Well, there was a program called 60 Minutes that reported Chinese agents may have approached luxury car dealer Mr. Nick Chow, offering him $1 million Aussie dollars to fund his run for Melbourne seat as candidate. Mr. Chow was already a member of the party, of a political party. So Mr. Chow subsequently gave information of this approach to the Australian security services, but then later on he was found dead in a hotel room in Melbourne. And they haven't been able to figure out how he died, which is rather remarkable. And if you think, wow, Australia, that's really surprising, because you don't really hear much about that, right? If you're reading your local news and you're in Southeast Asia, as I am, why would you hear much about Australia? Granted, Australia is pretty nearby, but you probably didn't know. I didn't know. And looking into it, it turns out there's a lot of things going on, because that's not the only one. Look, subsequently, there's one more piece of information, one more case here. A man named William Wang has reportedly given authorities information about Chinese spy operations in Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Australia, saying he was personally involved in the spy work, the spycraft. Mr. Wang told 60 Minutes, the TV program, that he was aware of several Chinese spies operating in Australia and attempting to influence politics. Chinese officials have dismissed Mr. Wang's claim, saying he is an unemployed fugitive who was convicted of fraud before fleeing his homeland on a fake passport. I wonder where he got a fake passport from. And I like that they call him not just a fugitive, but an unemployed fugitive, because that bears extra weight. Like, you are not only a criminal, you're an unemployed criminal. You didn't even have a job. Then that's the real crime. So, this was really interesting, and he has apparently been fully debriefed. This was as far back as 2019. Yes, the information gathered was apparently very disturbing, according to Australian Treasurer Josh Frydenberg. I don't know why a treasurer was involved, but he had some remarks on that. So Mr. Wang Liqiang said he was involved in a kidnapping in 2015 of one of 5 Hong Kong booksellers suspected of selling dissident materials. And if you recall, there was a period of time when booksellers, publishers in Hong Kong were regularly going missing. They just disappear. And, their families would talk to the media saying, I don't know what happened. Oh, but they've been, writing books criticizing China, revealing the secrets of the party, the Communist Party, and then they disappeared. Yeah. And if, he's legitimate, he would be the first Chinese intelligence operative to blow his cover. So this would be quite a coup, right? Because if he was involved in the kidnapping of the Hong Kong booksellers, which is what some very, very clear, examples, like allegedly, committed by Chinese intelligence services, If he was involved, he would know, how they operate, like where the safe houses are, where do you take these people to. That highly likely he would know such things, and so those could be very useful. Now, moving on. Has all of Australia's efforts been effective? Is this merely a drop in the ocean? What are they doing? How do you gauge their effectiveness? Well, I have something for you on that. Check this out. China accuses Australia of mass espionage, peddling rumors, and stoking confrontation. Foreign Ministry in Beijing says evidence of Australian spying activities is irrefutable. And I don't even have to show you the details about this article, because all you need to know is that China is so bothered by Australia's counter-espionage or espionage that they have to complain about it loudly through their foreign ministry, saying you're too much. You're intolerable. I can't stand you. How dare you? I just find that unbelievable. That's amazing. That's great. Great if you are Australian, or great if you enjoy watching Australia win, as I do. Okay, moving on though. This is of course a minor thing for Beijing. Why? Because right now they are just winning. Now, just yesterday, I think I spoke about some editorials talking about how China is in a tough spot, awkward position. They want to support their Russian buddies, but the rest of the world putting pressure on them, and I don't see it. As I said, I don't see a problem. And today, it's reported in Nikkei Asia that the Chinese yuan's value is soaring while the ruble's crashing. Now, of course, we expect the ruble to crash, and if we accepted the conventional view that China is in such an awkward spot, things are really difficult for them, we might think maybe they will suffer as well, because people would see that China is too close to Russia and they will don't want to do business with China. No, not at all. All the Russian riches, all the Russian financial transactions, the businesses are just suddenly very pro China all of a sudden, and you can see that here reflected. I don't even have to show you the contents of the article. It's just that China's current position is working out very well for them. Now, has Chinese finance been doing very well? Has China's efforts to establish business relationships, trade, economic relationships with other countries been working out well? Well, they've been doing it for a long time. Here you go. Here's an editorial by Mr. Rahm Emanuel. I think he was former mayor of Chicago, and now U.S. ambassador to Japan. So he advocates against Chinese investment overseas, saying that they fund your development, but they often give you lend money to you at non-concessional terms. So what does that mean? Non-concessional terms, so I guess you don't get any discount. A concession would mean you get some exceptional benefit, but you don't get it that way, right? You just get it at a pretty standard rate, or maybe unfavorable rate even, that are impossible for nations to repay. And my understanding is that this has happened. Maybe not even in Asia. It could be in South America, parts of Africa. I don't know about the Central Asian countries. So, but there are definitely cases of this happening. That is, they can't repay, and then say Chinese companies or the government may fund, say, a port somewhere to build the port, dredge the port, build the port infrastructure, bring in the cranes, train all the people, and then subsequently, when business isn't good enough for the local government to pay the Chinese back for the development, for the loans, Chinese may say, well, I'm going to take over the port, in some way or other. So that's what Rahm Emanuel is saying here. So China sometimes lay claims to nation's commodity exports, particularly oil. Yeah, they could take over the port. They could take over your commodity exports. They might say, you have to pay me. If you can't pay me in cash, pay me in oil. And if you're not producing enough oil to pay me what you owe me, maybe I should just take over the oil infrastructure. So without going into specifics, Mr. Emanuel said there are multiple examples of this trap. Some projects have been halted, others have led to violence, but all have the common quality of buyer's remorse. He says, worst of all, the real terms of China's loans are frequently kept secret. And that is the part, actually, of this whole article, which, it's really, the word for it is polemical, that he's arguing one point of view and he doesn't give airtime to the other point of view, which is fine. He's the U.S. ambassador, right, to Japan, and he's talking about Beijing's evil. So you don't expect him to argue the other side, right? And we just take it with a grain of salt and know that is his position, and we try to get what is useful out of it. Now, it is true that they are frequently kept secret. And how do I know this? Well, because you don't actually have to look very far. Even if you live in Singapore, right next door is example. So there was this railway line called the East Coast Rail Link that was being regarded as a debt trap, because it was to be financed by China, but somehow the Malaysian government had to pay a lot of money for it. See, China's not just reduced the fee for the East Coast Rail Link to 44 billion ringgit, but also agreed to a 50-50 joint venture to operate the line. So, can you believe it? That before the renegotiation, there was no 50-50 joint venture? So what kind of, was there a joint venture, or was it just going to be operated by China? No idea. And these terms were not, all laid out in a publicly visible document somewhere. It's outrageous. And this was reported in 2019. Prime Minister at the time, Mahathir Mohamad, he said that this was signed during the Najib administration. And he called this reduction a solution to our concern about the debt trap. And I would agree with Prime Minister Mahathir. It is a considerable saving for us. The interest payment will be far less. Yes, thank goodness. Under the New Deal, local participation in civil works of the Key Land Bridge have also been increased from 30 to 40%. And this is something that I think I have seen elsewhere as well, that a project is agreed, and Chinese companies, are participating. They bring in their expertise, they bring in their engineers, and what happened is that, well, even though the project is taking place in some country somewhere outside of China, that country doesn't actually get to benefit from a transfer of knowledge and skills and training, because all the experts are from China, and local participation is so meaningless. It's so minimal. So in this, there's actually a term here saying that local participation, used to be 30%, but now has been increased to 40%. So that's much better, and the profit will be 80-20 to Malaysia. So that is a pretty big deal, and it gives a hint. It gives it gives you a little bit of an outline. It's not clear, but you can start to see a little bit of the outline of the deal that Malaysia was facing. That Ram Emanuel references these kinds of deals. And who signed these deals? Well, former Prime Minister Najib. Thank goodness he's not around anymore, I suppose. Okay, now that you know that, remember to be very, very skeptical if your, local government, wherever you are, is considering a development deal with a Chinese company. Now, moving on into something totally different. Check this out. Singapore's most respected newspaper, the Straits Times, is reporting that corals show rising sea levels in Singapore are very likely due to climate change. Wow, that sounds like a big, big deal, right? Because I think anyone can wonder, okay, we're going to measure sea levels. How do you do that? Because the sea is changing all the time, right? And then as the sea rises and falls, you can't really track the level. But corals, oh wow, maybe that's like a novel way to track changes in the sea level. And I agree, that's what caught my attention. So it's what here. The key figure is that sea levels had gone up by 14 centimeters since pre-1970 levels. 14 centimeters is a lot of centimeters, right? 14 centimeters is what, something like this. It's a lot. And if you're standing on a beach, you imagine the water rising 14 centimeters. That could be pretty serious. So I got to checking this figure out a little more because I thought, is that true? Is that right? 14 is so much. That's got to be, like some shocking pace of climate change. So I want to check it out. And sure enough, I found the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. It shows here, how sea levels have changed over time. And look at that. Data goes back all the way to 1880, which is nearly 200 years ago. Remarkable. And they show, what do you call cumulative sea level change in inches. So you can see at the starting right at the 0 point of the x-axis, there's no change, right? Then subsequent to that, sea levels have always been rising since 1880, uninterrupted. Remarkable. And you would think, wow, maybe that is actually climate change, right? Let's see. And then there's even a line here for satellite measurements. Remarkable. So I didn't just stop there. And I want to... Now, that's one side of the argument. Of course, now you've seen... If you watch any of my videos at all, you know that I wouldn't stop there. I want to hear the other side of the story. So here we go. I found it. The Penn State University Integrate project has this to say about sea levels in the past 200,000 years. So this Penn State University, highly respected university. And here's what we have. Let's look at how sea levels have changed over the past 200,000 years of Earth's history based on evidence provided by paleoclimatology. Right. So you can see here, this graph is obtained by analyzing oxygen isotopes in ice cores. So you drill into ice, you analyze the oxygen that has been encased in the ice, and that tells you something about the sea levels from before. Okay, approximately 125,000 years ago, the sea level was 8 meters higher than it is today. 125,000 years ago. Here you go. It would be about here. Right? And what does that tell us? It says 8 meters higher than it is today. Oh yes, sorry, here it is, 125, so it'll be here, 8 meters higher than it is today. Did you know that? Because what we saw was data going back to 1880, and we're told that this is a runaway, sea level increase. It's insane. It's constantly increasing, and it's the highest it's ever been as far back as data goes. But when you look at this, gosh, this data goes back 200,000 years, and you can see that over the past 200,000 years, there's been a lot of variation. And I'm quite certain that, at this highlighted part, 125,000 years ago, we didn't have, anthropogenic climate change to, raise sea levels 8 meters higher than what we have. And you might say, well, Waylene, be that as it may, we have a high level now, even historically speaking, and it still looks like it's going higher. So maybe you should do something about it. And I'll say, yeah, totally. I would love to do something about it. But is this something we can influence, or should we influence? So if you look at this chart actually says that sea levels have been increasing since nearly 20,000 years ago. So this is a trend going back as far as 20,000 years ago. So we today are well into a trend that started 20,000 years ago. Can we stop that? And is it, too is it too much hubris, too much arrogance to think that, oh, it's our activity causing the majority of the change? Granted that, I can accept that, our activities on planet Earth are causing some change. But when I look at this, I have to call into question, like, well, it's been going on for 20,000 years, nearly 20,000 years. Did we really make a difference? And if you look at those charts, we started, I think, in the 1880s and 90s were just at the start of the Industrial Revolution. Why is this chart, so constant? Like, didn't we have, like 100 times more carbon emissions, like maybe even 1,000 times more carbon emissions today than we did back then? Why is this, not more like a, exponentially increasing curve? If, indeed it is mainly driven by our activities. Okay, I asked the question, but I don't know the answers, and I don't want to get into a mudslinging match with people who will say that I'm some kind of a climate denier. I don't think that's accurate. I do think that our activities do change the environment. Now, as to what degree and whether it puts us on a bad trajectory, that remains to be seen. And how do I justify that? Well, take a look at this. On the Wall Street Journal, they had an article. What else did Al Gore get wrong? Do you remember Al Gore? Or are you too young to know? The former vice president's pronouncements on population may be more embarrassing than his climate predictions. Embarrassing climate predictions, you say? So, a long time ago, back in 2006, Mr. Gore said the following. He was in town for a premiere of An Inconvenient Truth that at the time was considered a groundbreaking documentary. I watched it, chronicling what has become his crusade, educating the masses that global warming is about to toast our ecology and our way of life. So he said that within the next 10 years, the world will reach a point of no return in the year 2000. Here we are in 2022. I have yet to hear about the, that we have reached a point of no return. I remember hearing it that, we have to, make major changes to our life. And I've definitely been hearing it since at least the year 2000, even before that. And so he said that 10 years in, by 2010, you'll be the point of no return. Here we're in 2020, and we're still not seeing, some of the things that he said come to pass. I think he said something like Miami will be underwater, all the glaciers will be gone. And there were even photos for it. Very convincing stuff. If you have not seen An Inconvenient Truth, I recommend it. Check it out. One of your streaming services may carry it. So when you hear that, very clear evidence exists for disaster if we don't change the way we live, I'm a little skeptical about that. Now look at this. The Straits Times also carried this piece saying climate change is driving humanitarian crises worldwide, according to the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, an organization part of that's under the United Nations, and they've been producing reports very frequently, talking about what's going on with climate change. Now, let's take a brief look at this. All right. Human activities such as burning of fossil fuels are warming the planet, causing society to reel from impacts that will only worsen if the actions to deal with the crisis are not immediately taken, said the body in a major report released on Monday, which was quite recent. And they've been publishing these reports since, over 10 years ago. But I don't think that the message has changed at all. Right? Climate change manifestations. Let's see. So this is actually not very clear cut. in Asia, the IPCC working group said that increased frequency of hazards, such as floods and droughts, could increase vector and waterborne diseases. Now, if you're skimming it, you might think that is making the claim climate change is causing flooding, or climate change is causing drought, which would be a very easy conclusion to draw, right? Because that's what you see. Climate change is driving humanitarian crises, coupled with a photo of a flood. But if you read it, it doesn't actually say that. It doesn't actually say that. And if you think that I'm wrong, feel free to point it out to me, which paragraph. As usual, the link will be in the description, so you can read it and tell me if I'm wrong. Now, I believe that I'm totally right. See, human activities are warming the planet, okay? Rising temperature, changing rainfall patterns are really bad for us. Yes. They're causing widespread severe disruption. Okay. The impacts of climate change go beyond environmental factors. Right. So there's actually no sentence that says climate change is causing intensified, storms and floods and drought. But it is implied, right? And that's rather sneaky. I did skip the bottom part because it talks about nature as a solution, which is not what we're interested in. We're trying to, look for a statement that climate change is causing, more intense flooding or storms, but that doesn't actually appear. And that's really sneaky, really, really sneaky. Miss Audrey Tan, that's sneaky reporting from you. I do not approve. Now, however, I want to end on good note. Look here. Duterte approves inclusion of nuclear power in the Philippine energy mix. So the Philippines has actually once upon a time considered working on nuclear power under their former leader Ferdinand Marcos. The power plant was built in 1976 and completed in 1984. How unfortunately it was scrapped 2 years later following President Marcos's ouster, it says here, and the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. So public opinion turned against it. Very unfortunate. However, the late dictator's son, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., plans to revisit the project, and sitting President Duterte has already approved the inclusion of nuclear power in the Philippine energy mix. Now, you might think, wow, is Philippines crazy? No, absolutely not. Indonesia also is currently evaluating usage of, I think they're running their pilot project. They're the most creative of all. They have the idea to have the latest generation nuclear power plant on a floating platform. And the benefit to that will be it's far away from any residential areas. I want to point out that now I've looked a little bit into this topic, and it's really interesting. All the nuclear power plants that had accidents, which, bear in mind, in the grand, of all the power plants ever in existence, ever producing power, the rate of accidents actually super low. You can name the ones that actually happen, on one hand. Chernobyl in the US would be 3 Mile Island, and then in Japan is the Fukushima Daiichi accident. And all of those were what we call first generation nuclear power plants. It turns out, did you know that many of the aircraft carriers in the world run on nuclear power? They have nuclear power reactors within their hull. They run on nuclear power. And these aircraft carriers can run for something like 20 years without refueling. And did you know that a large proportion of the US submarine fleet are nuclear powered, and they too can be underwater without refueling for like a decade easily. And all of them are using, I think, might be the third generation nuclear reactor design, which in my understanding, are very safe. And right now, I hear that my understanding is that current generation is known as Gen 4. So Generation 4 nuclear reactors. And turns out their design is so clever that they're practically incapable of melting down. It goes something like this. You got to supply it with some power initially so that the reaction can begin to take place. And then if you don't supply it with power, the reaction fails to continue. It can't continue. So it's designed such that you have to give it a constant, steady supply of power from, say, your regular power grid, and then you'll be able to run. And if your regular power is not supplied, it just will shut down automatically, naturally, as part of its design. You don't actually have to go in, wearing suits, protective gear, trying to, pull and push these levers and buttons, which is entirely different from what the previous design was. I think older designs were all like, the reaction itself generates the power to keep the plant running, and then if the power goes off, none of the machines are working, and then you have to restore power before it can actually shut down the reaction. So very different designs, and I do recommend that you check it out. Just Google it, Gen 4 nuclear power. Very fascinating, and would be really cool if Philippines took advantage of Gen 4, not the older generation stuff, the latest generation stuff. Indonesia did as well. I reckon that other countries in Southeast Asia probably jump on that. And what the benefits would be to regular folk like you and I would be really cheap and abundant power. Cheap and abundant power. And what that allows us to do probably will be it would be great. I mean, it would be amazing. You can, have more. I think cheap power is a great driver of economic activity, right? You can have more Bitcoin mining, can have more, buildings. Buildings maybe are cheaper to maintain, which affects rents, which affects, business activity, and so on and so forth. I think just power is just like fundamental to everything. So this is great news. And it seems to be like this is actually one of the last acts that President Duterte will undertake. I think his term is due to end quite soon. But this is a great way for him to exit. And I think I support this. I think it's great. All right, everybody. That's all I prepared for today. I hope that you like the ending on that, ending on that positive note. I think that there's a lot to look forward to. Didn't expect to see that news about the Philippines trying out nuclear power. Also very encouraged to see that more and more countries are, there's more awareness of the need to have a critical, a citizenry that's critical, thinking critically, and to have better cybersecurity. And I don't know if I mentioned this. Oh, I think it's also great that in this time, any country that has taken Chinese investments before, they have a lot of leverage, because if they failed, say, to repay their loans, failed to make their repayments to China, and China chose to punish them legally, of course, according to the terms of the contract, it would look really bad with the background of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, of big country bullying a much smaller country. So it's just a really good time all around. I don't know if there will actually be any problems, like will any country that's taken Chinese money kick up a fuss, but it's a great time to do so. Yeah. And with that, everybody, I want to end the show. Hope you have a great time. Have a great week ahead. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.